Begin by laying out all the necessary tools and soaking the EXP disc and friction discs in oil for at least 5 minutes. Laying the bike on its side will make the installation process easier and will avoid having to drain the oil. To allow easy access to the clutch cover bolts, drop the brake pedal out of the way by removing the bolt from the ball joint. Before removing the clutch cover, remove the fluid line and the bleeder screw from the slave cylinder. The stock slave cylinder and clutch cover won't be reused. Once inside the engine, remove the throwout assembly followed by the screws and springs. Using a 17mm socket, remove the center hub bolt, then lift the core of the clutch out by gripping the hub at the spring posts. Before setting these parts aside, check the back side of the center hub for the thrust washer, where it likes to stick from the oil film. Hang on to this washer, it will be reinstalled later. Next, remove the basket from the engine. The basket bearings like to come out with the basket, so you'll want to make sure they remain in place on the main shaft. To make drilling out the rivet heads in the next step easier, it's best to center punch them first. So set the basket on a workbench with the ring gear facing upward and use a punch and hammer to place a divot into the center of each rivet head. Using the drill bit provided with your kit, drill the heads off of each rivet so that the backing plate can be removed from the assembly. Some of the heads may require coaxing with a chisel to remove. Carefully pry off the backing plate and remove the ring gear and rubber dampers from the basket. The stock basket and backing plate will not be reused. Once the rubber dampers are clean of chips and debris, transfer them to the Rekluse basket followed by the stock ring gear and the new backing plate. Apply the provided thread locking compound to the basket screws. Torque them in a star pattern to 80 inch-pounds. Using the center punch again, stake the ends of the screws to deform them a little and keep them from backing out. Be sure to stake the steel screws, not the aluminum basket. Install the newly compiled basket assembly into the main shaft in the bike, followed by the stock thrust washer. Moving the kickstart lever can help the basket teeth mesh so that it drops right in. Place the Rekluse pressure plate into the basket next with the tooth side facing upward. It will fit loosely in the basket until the clutch plates and hub are installed in the following steps. The Rekluse clutch pack consists of steel drive plates alternated with friction discs whose tabs index into the basket. The first disc in will be a steel drive plate followed by the EXP disc. Then install the rest of the pack such that the last plate in is a steel drive plate. After the last drive plate is in, install the Rekluse center hub by gently rotating it until the center spline lines up with the teeth on the main shaft and the hub drops into place. Next, place the stock clutch springs in over the spring posts. Followed by the Rekluse spring push plate and new screws. Be sure to use the button head screws provided, not the stock screws, to avoid clearance issues and possible engine damage. Tighten the screws each a little at a time in a star pattern before torquing to 90 inch-pounds. It can be helpful to place the transmission into high gear and have a friend hold the rear wheel to keep the clutch from spinning while the bolts are torqued. Clean and dry the threads of the stock center hub bolt, then apply thread locking compound before placing it into the main shaft and torquing to 45 foot-pounds. The last internal clutch piece to install is a stock throwout assembly. Place this into the spring push plate. On a workbench, carefully remove the rubber gasket from the stock clutch cover and clean it of dirt and debris before attempting to transfer it to the Rekluse clutch cover. Applying a thin film of fresh grease can be helpful to hold it in place in its new groove. With its gasket in place, install the Rekluse clutch cover using the 5 stock bolts. Then reinstall the brake pedal ball joint bolt. The stock clutch cover is not compatible with any Rekluse clutch product because it does not provide adequate clearance to the moving parts. First, check to ensure that the small steel ball bearing located in the slave piston has remained in place during shipping. It should be held in place with a small amount of assembly grease. Make sure that the ball does not fall out when you turn the slave cylinder upside down. You will pre-bleed the Rekluse slave cylinder on a workbench away from the engine. First, use a 4mm Allen key to orient the adjuster screw to a location where the top O-ring is visible. Now use both thumbs to compress the piston until it bottoms in the cylinder. Next, pour the appropriate clutch fluid into the slave cylinder port until full. Check the cap of the clutch master cylinder to determine which clutch fluid to use. The two options are brake fluid and mineral oil. The seals in the clutch hydraulic system are compatible with one or the other but not both, so be sure to use the appropriate fluid to avoid seal damage. Turn the adjuster screw clockwise while keeping the fluid topped off as it goes until the screw bottoms out. Reverse the adjuster screw after bottoming it back to its initial position with the top O-ring barely visible. Then compress the piston again with your thumbs until it bottoms. Some fluid may spill out, just be sure to avoid contact with your eyes or skin. Repeat this process until no more air bubbles are coming from the top port when the piston is compressed. With the slave cylinder bled, walk over to the bike and loosely thread the stock fluid line and bleeder screw into the ports in the Rekluse slave cylinder. Next, place the provided O-ring and paper gasket onto the backside of the Rekluse slave cylinder before securing it to the clutch cover. Do not use the stock screws to install the Rekluse slave cylinder, or damage to the internal clutch components will occur. The Rekluse provided slave cylinder screws are shorter to ensure sufficient clearance inside the clutch. Make sure to place the longest of the 3 screws in the hole closest to the bleeder screw. With the slave cylinder secured on the clutch cover, the fluid line can be tightened. Attach the supplied bleed tube to the bleeder screw nipple on the slave cylinder and loop it into a suitable catch bottle. It can be helpful to use a piece of wire or a zip tie to hang the catch bottle from the foot peg. Back at the handlebar, first check to make sure there is plenty of fluid in the reservoir. Pump the clutch lever 3 to 5 times and then hold it against the grip while cracking open the bleeder screw at the slave cylinder to allow fluid and air to escape into the catch bottle. Repeat this process until the clutch lever regains proper feel and no more air bubbles emit from the bleeder screw. With the system fully bled, tighten the bleeder screw and remove the tube. Top off the master cylinder with clutch fluid and reinstall the OEM cap and bladder. Replace the rubber cap on the bleeder screw. Now that we've finished the installation, it's time to set the installed gap in the clutch. This is achieved externally by dialing the slave cylinder adjuster screw to the setting that corresponds to the ideal separation or installed gap between the clutch plates. Using the long end of a 4mm Allen key, turn the adjuster screw clockwise until it stops under moderate pressure. You are trying to feel for the point where it's just starting to push against the clutch springs and separate the clutch pack. We call this the starting point. Once you have found the starting point, turn the adjuster screw clockwise 2 ticks shy of 1 full turn. This equates to about 14 ticks total. This will not necessarily be your final setting, but is a good reference point for using free play gain to find the correct settings in the following steps. Place the bike in neutral and start the engine and let it warm up for a few minutes. Wrap the included rubber band around the outer end of the handlebar grip and attach it to the ball end of the clutch lever. With the transmission still in neutral, quickly rev the engine from idle to about half throttle and let it immediately return to idle. When the engine revs, the clutch lever should move in toward the handlebar. This movement is called free play gain. Optimal free play gain is about 1/8 of an inch of movement at the end of the lever. This measurement at the lever corresponds to achieving an ideal installed gap inside the clutch pack. Free play gain should also be checked using just your hand, as you will check it by hand before every ride. Do this by applying a slight amount of pressure to the lever, just enough to take up the free play, while revving the engine in the same way as before. If there is too much free play gain, meaning the clutch lever moves in too far, turn the adjuster screw clockwise a few ticks to increase the installed gap. If there is too little free play gain, or none at all, turn the adjuster screw counterclockwise a few ticks to reduce the installed gap. Repeat the rev cycle after each adjustment until optimal free play gain is achieved. Perform the clutch break-in steps laid out in the installation guide before going for a serious ride.